I'm going to be talking about a leaky bucket. It sounds strange, but I'm telling you that's the biggest topic. Because if you were here a few months back, we introduced this concept of services and software and how big it was and how great it is and what it is and all of that. Now we need to talk about how the hell do you get there, right? And how many of you have read the MIT report? You know, how many of you have read the HFS research reports? Better. And you would have seen that no matter what you look at, there are less than 10% of these AI ambitions that are getting realized. So I think the question is, what's hype, what's reality, and how do we get there, right? And so that's what I'm going to talk about. If I can get the clicker to work, which it doesn't, which is going to be a pain. I keep saying, by the way, AV is much harder than AI. So let's see if we can make the clicker work. Oh, there you go. So look, there is a lot of excitement about AI, right? I need to be closer to this thing, otherwise it doesn't work. Or am I using the wrong one? Yeah, this one works better. Okay. So you look at some of these, right? And this is, by the way, real conversations at HFS. We have something called the HFS One Council, which is a group of about 220, 230 enterprise leaders only. And as we've been having conversations with them, they've started to talk to us about some of the best agentic AI use cases that they've actually implemented. And you see some of these, right? Helping patients navigate the social service system. And that's a great example of personalization. It's going to be very hard without AI to personalize something for Saurabh. Support factory workers with real-time answers. You know, that's another fantastic use case that I saw. Forecasting clinical supply with live data. You know, Phil talked about the 4 Ps of prediction, performance, personalization, productivity. And I think this is a great example of using predictive capabilities of AI. Auto-generating clinical certificates, absolutely fantastic example of performance or productivity. Autonomous finance operations, you know, this is finance people obviously talk about productivity, you know, but there you go. And ambient documentation, you know, how many of you've actually been to a doctor where the doctor seems to be spending more time with you these days than earlier, you know? And there's something around AI behind that, which is AI is being used to capture the notes versus just the doctor, the poor doctor, all they're doing is to try and type everything that you're saying. So there is a lot of potential, and that's why when we looked at this last year, we predicted it's going to be a $1.5 trillion market, which is going to absorb revenue both from services and software. So let me explain how that sort of comes in. Let's assume there was no AI, there's nothing in this world, and we were going hunky-dory with where we were like 2 years back. The global technology services market is about $1.5 trillion today. You know, you look at IT services, consulting, BPO, all kinds of managed services, all of that kind of stuff. And that's going to grow to about $2.5 trillion, growing at about 5% is what we see. The B2B technology or software is about $1 trillion in size. This does not include B2C, by the way, so that's why some people ask me, you know, why is software smaller than services? But you know, if you look at B2B software, then that's sort of the market size, and it's growing at a healthy 10-15%, and we expect it to become 2.5x in the next 10 years. But this is not going to happen, because what we think is going to happen is the global technology services market, whether you're an IT outsourcer, a BPO provider, a managed services provider, a consulting player, there's actually going to be deceleration. There's going to be deflation in that market. We expect a negative 3 to 4% growth or degrowth in that market. And this is assuming we don't change anything, right? This is the legacy, people-driven, labor arbitrage-driven sort of model. The software market is going to grow, but it's going to grow slower. You know, we don't expect it to grow at the 10-15% rate. I think what's going to be super interesting is this orange triangle, which we call services as software. which is almost like a brand new category that's going to emerge. And that's going to absorb revenue from both those two categories that we've seen below, because the lines between what was software and what was services is blurring. I see ServiceNow and Salesforce, and I think there are some Google Cloud people here and others. They are starting to ask us questions. Can we get a share of the pie of that services market? Can we get into claims processing? Can we get into payroll? Can we get into all of those kind of things? And why not? And the service providers are saying, can we actually productize some of our solution accelerators? We've got all these great tools. Do we have to have a wrapper of people around it? Can we go and sell it to R&D units? Can we go and sell it to GCCs? Can we go and do all of that? So the lines between services and software are blurring. And I think if you are a client, if you are a CIO or the way that you're spending and then the way that you're creating budgets for IT needs to change, because right now, a lot of the third-party spending is happening in either services or software. I think there's going to be this third category. Now, we call it services as software. I don't care, you can call it apples, but you've got to spend on apples as well. What's going to be super interesting, again, is this is what we can see. This $1.5 trillion is what we can see, because this is based on existing services and software that we have. And if you start to take, and I'm not going to go into the details of all the assumptions that we've got built into it, that's $1.5 trillion. There's going to be a much bigger space of undefined problem statements that we can start to address through these things. And in my little brain, I don't know how to calculate that, at least today. But there's going to be a much bigger pie than this $1.5 trillion that's going to come in. And I think that's interesting. And we're starting to see that through that ambient doctor, AI technologies, through all those things that we are starting to see. Is that service? Is that software? Not quite sure, right? It's somewhere in between. But the reality is that there's less than 10% of these AI ambitions that are being realized, right? Look at study after study. We've sliced and diced it like 20 different ways last year, asking all different kinds of questions. And no matter what you ask, the answer always varies between 4 and 7%, right? So practically everybody is trying something out. I call it death by 1,000 POCs. That's happening right now. There's a POC happening in every nook and corner of every enterprise. How many of them are actually scaling up and delivering value is the key question. So that's the enterprise side of the story. You look at the service provider or the technology provider side of the story. If this thing actually materializes, what do you think should happen? What should happen is our revenue growth and our operating margins should get delinked from headcount, right? It shouldn't, if services as software of AI-led solutions is what we are taking to the market, then I don't need to hire that many people. That needs to be nonlinear growth. But surprise, surprise. See last year, how far that industry average has moved. It's by a phenomenal 1%. Right? So you look at this from either directions. Enterprises struggling to scale these things up, service providers or technology providers struggling to move the needle from where they were, right? 1%, I think we can do better than 1%, right, in a year. But that's where we are. That's why I think we need to look at this leaky bucket. Because somewhere or the other, we have big dreams, we have big ambitions, but all those ambitions are getting leaked away because there are so many holes in this. And let me talk about these. The first one is, and Phil touched upon this, is agentic washing. Everybody is AI first today. Nobody comes to us at HFS and say we are AI second. How can that be? How can everybody be AI first, right? It's just not possible, right? RPA tools are suddenly AI agentic tools. Simple chatbots are agentic AI solutions. It's just that the blockchain people are still calling it blockchain. They've not sort of started to call it AI, but maybe that'll happen. Everything is suddenly become AI. everybody's an AI expert, right? In fact, if you look at that 7% or 4% of those, and you actually drill down into those, half of them are not actually agentic AI solutions. So the answer to that 5%, 4%, whichever number you believe, is actually even lower. Because everything is agentic AI, but nothing is agentic AI. I don't think we have a standard definition of this thing. Every service provider, every technology provider is coming to you as, this is our AI first solution. What the hell does it mean? Who cares? It's great marketing. I think the second big issue is I don't think we are creating the business cases right. Everybody is so obsessed with productivity, so obsessed with headcount, that it just doesn't work. And this is honestly what happened with the RPA world 10 years back. Everybody sold RPA, oh man, you'll get it in 7 days. You'll get this phenomenal, we'll solve for world hunger in 10 days. And nothing of that sort of happened. Because even if you look at agentic AI, even if there was no agentic washing, and you look at real agentic solutions, they're going to be solving parts of an individual's problems, parts of the role. I use a lot of AI, or I think I use a lot of AI. Maybe I need to do more. But I don't think it's going to replace everything that Saurabh does. It's going to improve my productivity by 20, 30%, maybe 40%, but not by 100%. So there is this concept of fractional FTEs, which we often miss. And that's why the CEOs and the boards are saying, oh, McKinsey told me this is going to improve our productivity by 50%. You're only showing me 10%. Where's that 40% leakage? And a lot of that leakage is fractional FTEs. It's not fully replacing the job descriptions. And unless it becomes a 10-year-old journey where it has scaled up phenomenally across the enterprise, across all the 100,000 people that you have, you won't realize that 50% productivity. It's just stupid in my mind to go and be so obsessed with productivity. And that's why I loved what Phil showed earlier today, that when you look at POCs and pilots, about 50, 60% of them are focused on productivity. But when you look at AI solutions that are actually in production, that number dropped to about 20%. And that's the reason behind this. I think we are making our business cases wrong if we are just obsessing about headcount, because frankly, 80% of them will not work. Other big issue is data debt. It's not like we don't have data. It's like we don't know how to use the data. And I'll tell you, HFS is a very small organization. We tried to do I think Phil alluded to this in his thing, we tried to do something agentic with our research. And the idea was that instead of talking to a Saurabh or a Melissa or a Dana, maybe you can talk to something AI, and it'll give you 70, 80% of the answer, because who wants to talk to clients anyways, right? So, but the whole AI thing was pretty easy, not even costly. But we realized it was so hard to turn our data, and this is a small organization, into being AI ready. We had to actually get one person to just tag our reports and all of that stuff to be somewhat AI ready for that solution. So we actually spent more money on that person to get our data ready than actually the AI solution. The AI solution was pretty cost effective, right? And now imagine all of you are probably 100,000 times bigger than what HFS is in terms of size, in terms of complexity, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not even talking about, people talk about data debt, about unstructured data and this and that. I'm talking about basic stuff. We haven't solved for all the data lakes that we created have become data swamps, right? Everybody created a CDO role, Chief Data Officer role, about 10 years back. Everybody said, oh, the CDO must report to the CIO or the CTO. Then they said, no, that doesn't work. The CDO now reports into the COO or the CFO. Oh, no, that doesn't work. The CDO needs to report across the business. So how does one person report to 20 business lines? I don't know. We don't even know where does data report to, who's the owner of data, leave aside the technology solutions behind it, right? And I think this data debt is a huge problem. We estimate that for every dollar spent on AI, you need to spend $3 on data. We just don't know where. But it is a huge problem. So it's not AI, but this is a leaky bucket of data debt. You've got to solve for that. Phil talked about process debt, so I won't talk about that a lot more, but look, one answer is we are very happy with being slightly better, slightly cheaper, slightly faster. If that's your AI ambition, go for it, But that's not transformation, right? And transformation, AI is not some magic thing that will solve all your process. And I remember the first time when we were at a client and we were just trying to implement a simple tool. And for the client's security audit team, it took them 6 months to approve that. By that time, that tool was sort of useless because some far more better tools had come into the market. So there is this, in every organization, I see this East versus West divide. The West Coast is coming up with a new technology every 24 hours. I think May Habib or somebody was saying that, right? And the East Coast hasn't still adopted cloud. So what are we talking about, right? I think about less than 30% of enterprise data is on cloud. So there is a huge amount of process debt. There is a huge amount of tech debt, obviously, right? I met with a CIO of a very large oil and gas company, and he asked me a simple question. He said, Saurabh, do you know how many apps do we have? And I thought, if he's asking me, it must be large, right? So I should make up, I had no idea, but I thought, let me make up a big number. And I said, 1,000. And he said, we have 20,000. And those are the ones that we can count. So imagine, even if you introduce a small teeny-weeny thing into that spaghetti or mess or whatever you call it, it's going to have a butterfly effect. And at the same time, the average tenure of a CIO, I think over the last 5 years, has reduced from 36 months to about 18 months today. So who's going to bell the cat on the tech debt thing? Everybody wants to be in the HBR case study compendium and say, I implemented AI, but nobody's solving for the tech debt in reality, right? Because should I? Is that possible in my 18 months? Just yesterday, I had a 2-hour briefing on mainframe modernization. And my question was, why do you exist? Right? Okay, I understand you're doing it fantastically well, but I met my first ever boss. I used to work for a company, and Polo Ralph Lauren was my client, and we designed their merchandising system on AS400. How many of you remember AS400? A lot of you. And I met my first boss from 25, 30 years back, and he told me they're still using the same thing. He said, Saurabh, you can find your code in there. I'm happy at a personal level, but I'm very, very disappointed in at the same thing. Cultural debt is the next big issue, And these leaks or these leaky points are sort of somewhat interrelated, because a lot of the culture debt comes because of the why, the first, productivity obsession. If people are not stupid, if they feel all that your company wants to go after using AI is headcount reduction, will I support that company as an individual? Or I'm going to save my job? I'm going to save my job, right? How will I embrace that initiative around AI if I figure it out, whether directly or indirectly, that all that we're trying to do is replace people or reduce headcount or go after that? So it's sort of a lose-lose situation everywhere. I think another thing that we often miss is the ecosystem challenge. If you look at any ecosystem of any provider, leaving aside the 20,000 apps example, but if you start to look at the 80-20 picture, the ecosystem is largely based on infra, apps, and some SaaS, right? There's some cloud or data centers, or whether you're on-premise or hybrid or whatever version of that. There's some telecom connectivity things. Then there are your core systems of records, SAP, Oracle, and then there are some workflows on top of it, Salesforce, and some smaller workflows, could be finance-specific, procurement-specific, HR-specific, etc. That's our ecosystem. Now, there are 50, 60 startups coming in every day. Very few CIOs even know what the OpenAI's business model is. Leave aside how do you structure a relationship with them. Very few knew. We did this, I did this sort of random tangential research exercise. There was a CFO study that we were doing, and just at the end of, so I was interviewing a bunch of CFOs, and just at the end I would ask them, do you know what Hugging Face is? And 8 out of 10 CEOs had no clue, but they all claimed they knew Hugging Face. But they had no clue that Hugging Face is a big open source AI provider. So leave aside that, and frankly, I don't blame them. It's so hard. We as analysts are struggling to keep pace with this, to be completely honest. How can an average CIO, CTO, whoever, can keep pace with this? Leave aside how do you structure relationships with them. You look at outsourcing or IT service providers or BPO providers or managed services. Do you know when the IP for creating outsourcing contracts was written? It was in early 1990s. We are trying to buy and sell new stuff with the 1990s playbook. We might have added some bells and whistles. The Excel spreadsheets look sexier, there are more macros in it. But fundamentally, we've not changed that. So we are trying to buy and sell new shit with an old playbook. How does that work? We don't know how to structure these relationships. And that's why people say, oh, let me do some maverick spending here, let me do something here, let me just figure it out on my own. And there are individual heroes, but nothing comes out at an enterprise scale because there is a huge amount of ecosystem challenge. And the last one is the legacy deal structure, which I've already talked about, right? I don't think, and this is honestly the reason why we came up with the AI deal labs at HFS, is somebody's got to make that change. And that's the reason why I don't think HFS has all the answers to this, but that's why we're calling it a lab. What we can at least do is bring providers and clients together and say, instead of following a sourcing advisory process, let's just brainstorm and do it as a problem-solving session. Maybe something will come out of it, and maybe in 5 years we can have a sourcing advisory process for AI deals. But as of now, nobody's ready, and nobody's picking up the mantle. Everybody's blaming the other person in the ecosystem of, oh, providers don't know how to sell, oh, buyers are, everybody blames procurement, right? That's become the easiest people to blame on. So I'll skip this in the interest of time because Phil talked about this. This is why I think it's very, very important. We are trying to buy AI-first solutions with FTE-based models. We are trying to, in our industry, we reward for presence, not performance. We still, even if you're buying strategy consulting, even if you're buying something HFS related, you're still paying by rate cards. And so what's the incentive of the consulting or a professional services company to drive immense amount of innovation in that contract? Because we are being paid for presence, not performance, right? The budgets are completely linear. Everybody, believe it or not, we've made so much money this year because people are asking us, is Philippines better or Budapest? Why do you care? Right? Is that an AI first question even? It's not, right? I'm not blaming them. I'm actually quite happy with the business success on that front, but I don't think it's the right question even in today's world. So I'll leave you with this. I think you're all leaders, whether you're with providers or technology providers or enterprises. I think we all can start something individually, and hopefully that you'll take that away. First of all, don't fall into the trap of thinking small. Don't just do it for cost cutting and headcount reduction, and I can remove 2 people here and 3 people here. Create a balanced scorecard. Maybe use what we are talking about, those 4 Ps. Yes, there should be productivity. You shouldn't ignore it, but blend productivity with performance, which is some amount of business outcomes. Blend it with personalization. What's the experience for either customers or employees? And drive prediction. Use AI's capability to navigate. Phil was talking about how the #1 thing because of tariffs is AI, because AI gives you predictive capabilities in an uncertain world. So I think we need to create more balanced scorecards, and don't fall into this trap of thinking small. Stop obsessing about technology. I think AI will sell when we don't talk about AI. And we have to start to look at maybe all these leaky buckets, however you want to call it, maybe the debt framework, but somehow or the other, the technology is there or thereabouts. And it's improving. There's a lot of activity on the West Coast, as I keep saying. But the East Coast people need to stop obsessing about technology here in New York. Start paying your debts. How much can you borrow off a credit card? At some point of time, you have to pay your credit card bills, right? And we've been borrowing forever. This debt is not reducing, it's actually increasing. And use AI to pay off your debts. Maybe that's a fantastic idea. You can use AI to improve your data quality. You can use AI to improve your data debts. You can improve AI to sort of give you better visibility into your process. But you've got to start paying your debts. Beware of the moral hazard. And moral hazard is essentially where one team gets the benefit, but the other pays for it. And that's, our incentives in our organizations are not aligned. When we coined this one office, the idea was there's only one office that matters, and that's the office that caters to the customer. But procurement, nobody likes procurement, right? Nobody likes, business doesn't like IT, because whenever business goes to IT, it's like, oh, your request is priority number 20 for me, so I'll get to it like in 18 months, right? There is no alignment within our organizations. And so there's this moral hazard where IT feels the benefit is going to be for business, and I'm doing all this work. Why should the CIO pay for this? These are the conversations that are happening. It's a moral hazard. We don't have common alignment. And then leadership is a verb. Just don't call yourself a leader because you manage 50 people. Frankly, if the productivity obsession is right, then you're going to manage fewer people. So is your leadership potential going down then? You're a smaller leader then? But I think let's stop talking and let's start doing. And with that, I would love to welcome 5 people that I think are doing something. So with that, we'll get to the enterprise panel, and I'd love to have Vikram come on stage, Girish, wherever you are, Shobit, John, why don't you come on? Hopefully that was helpful.